He forgot the one day I asked him never to, my mother's death anniversary. Instead he threw a party, for the woman he betrayed me with. They thought I'd break. But I learned to stay silent, to smile, and dismantle everything they built brick by brick. This isn't about revenge. It's about remembering who you are when they forget you. I always imagined the end of my marriage would be quiet. Maybe a tear-stained letter left on a kitchen table, or a final conversation held in hushed voices under dim lights. I never pictured it ending with lobster claws flying across a marble floor and an antique wine glass crashing into a $10,000 centerpiece. But that's the thing about betrayal, it doesn't come dressed in whispers. It crashes in with applause, red wine, and my husband holding the hand of the woman who once called me her best friend. And her birthday? Just happened to fall on the anniversary of my mother's death. How poetic. It started that morning. "Elena, wear something soft today," Julian said, flipping his cufflinks with one hand and checking his reflection in the mirror with the other. "You always look stiff in black." I blinked slowly from the bed. "It's the color people wear to cemeteries, Julian." He looked at me like I'd just told him I planned to join a cult. "We're not going to a cemetery today." "No," I replied, biting down the nausea crawling up my throat. "We're going to Tessa's birthday party." Julian adjusted his tie, completely unfazed. "She's making an effort to fix things." "She's your family now." Family. That word had never felt more perverse. Tessa Reed was once my classmate, then my father's mistress, now his wife. A 27-year age gap, and one funeral later she sat smugly in my mother's place, wearing her jewelry, redecorating her house, and now apparently inserting herself into my marriage too. I slipped into a simple navy dress. I didn't do it for Julian. I did it for the cameras that would inevitably be flashing all over the private ballroom of the Marigold Grand Hotel. She always chose that venue. Probably because it was the same place my father had taken my mother every anniversary, before he stopped coming home at all. The room smelled like orchids and expensive gilt. The kind only women like Tessa knew how to wear like perfume. She stood at the head of the table, wrapped in a pale lavender gown with diamonds dripping from her collarbones like frost. Her hair was curled, cascading down one shoulder like she was starring in a shampoo commercial. The moment we walked in, she turned with practiced surprise. "Elena," she purred, stepping forward with a flute of burgundy wine. "I'm so glad you came." My hands clenched into fists. Not because I hated her, though I did, but because she looked exactly like she had at my mother's funeral. Flawless, composed, glowing with victory. Beside me, Julian nudged me forward, his hand gently grazing my lower back. I didn't move. Tessa's eyes sparkled. "Let's put the past behind us, shall we? This toast is for new beginnings." She extended the glass. Julian did the one thing I never thought he would do. He took it from her hands and offered it to me. Like a peace offering. Like he thought this would fix everything. "Elena," he said quietly. "Please." A beat passed. Then another. I smiled. White. Gleaming. The kind of smile that looks pretty right before an explosion. I reached out, not for the glass but for the edge of the table. And with a single deliberate motion I flipped the entire thing. The crash echoed like a gunshot. Plates shattered. Lobster tails flew through the air. Red wine splattered across a $5,000 ivory tablecloth. Tessa shrieked as liquid splashed across her gown, clutching at her diamonds like they were on fire. Gasps erupted around the room. But I didn't care. I looked Julian in the eye as the chaos unfolded around us. "You brought me to a celebration on the day my mother jumped from the 18th floor because of that woman." "Elena." He stepped forward, aghast. I stepped back. "You dragged me here. You made me stand in front of the woman who broke my family apart. And you thought handing me a glass of wine would make me forgive her." Tessa tried to intervene, feigning embarrassment. "Elena, darling, let's not." "Don't call me that," I snapped. I turned toward my father, who had been silent up until now, content to let his new wife handle the performance. He looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe older. Or maybe the rot of what he'd become had finally caught up to his appearance. "Do you even remember what day it is?" I asked him, my voice steady. He blinked. "It's Tessa's." "It's the day Mom died," I interrupted. "The same day she begged you to stay home and you didn't." The silence was absolute. I reached for my clutch and walked out of the ballroom, heels clicking against marble like gunshots. Julian followed, of course, Elena, wait, he called. You didn't have to make a scene. I stopped in front of the elevators, pressing the button calmly. No, Julian. I had to. Because if I didn't, I might have choked on all the dignity I've swallowed over the past 3 years. By the time I returned to my grandmother's house, the sky had turned a dull, angry gray. Fitting, really. Come in, she said gently, stepping aside as I hauled my suitcase through the doorway. I placed my shoes neatly by the door. The same way I used to when I was 12, hiding from the storm of screaming adults behind me. I collapsed into her kitchen chair, staring at the familiar wood grain table, and laughed softly. It happened again, Grandma. She didn't ask what. He knew. I married a man who only weighs logic and image. Never emotion. Never loyalty. My grandmother slid a bowl of fruit toward me. I peeled a honeydew melon slice and placed it gently into her mouth. I told you, I said, resting my head against her shoulder. You picked a scumbag for Mom. And now you introduced one to me. I didn't leave Julian right away. Not officially. But that was the night I stopped being his wife in anything but name. And Tessa? She may have thought she'd won the battle that night. But I had just declared war. The morning after the birthday disaster, I woke up to the smell of jasmine tea and the soft rustling of newspapers. My grandmother's morning ritual. She sat at the head of the dining table, reading with her glasses perched at the tip of her nose, while I stared blankly into a bowl of oatmeal I hadn't touched. Elena, she said without looking up, your name is trending on social media. I didn't even blink. Let me guess. #LobsterGate? She smirked. #the toast you didn't take. I allowed myself a quiet laugh. At least they got that part right. I didn't bother checking my phone. I already knew what I'd find. Photos of the party, speculation about our marriage, and Tessa's crocodile tears in high resolution. She'd always been good at playing the wounded stepmother. The public would eat it up. That is, until I started feeding them something far more appetizing. I took a bite of oatmeal and calmly said, I need your safe. My grandmother finally looked up. The old one or the locked one? The locked one. Without another word, she got up, shuffled into her bedroom, and returned a moment later with a small brass key. Do what you need to do, she said, placing it in my palm. But don't forget to live after it's done. Inside that safe were 3 years of silent planning. Photos, documents, screenshots, and a USB drive labeled simply Blake Reed. Proof of Julian's casual disregard for my boundaries. Evidence of Tessa's slippery fingers inside my father's company. Bank statements that traced expensive gifts from Julian to stores Tessa frequented. Keychains, scarves, jewelry, even a luxury watch that matched the one she flaunted last week. Somewhere between wife and war general, I had quietly become a record keeper. And now my war had begun. Later that afternoon my phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Elena, came Tessa's sickly sweet voice. I've been trying to reach you. I stared out the window at my grandmother's hydrangeas, blooming like nothing in the world was falling apart. I blocked you, Tessa. What gave you the impression I wanted to talk? She laughed, soft and condescending. I know you're upset about last night, but I only asked Julian to bring you so we could talk. Honestly, the party was just an excuse. To force-feed me forgiveness? To fix things, she corrected, her tone syrupy. We're family. My throat tightened, but I didn't let it show. No, Tessa. You're a parasite. You latched onto my father, tore my family apart, and now you want my husband too. Elena. Don't, I interrupted. Don't pretend you don't know what you're doing. Her voice changed, sharper now. Whether you like it or not, I'm legally your stepmother. And I'm not going anywhere. I smiled coldly. Then brace yourself. Because neither am I. I hung up. And blocked the new number. That evening, I sat with my grandmother again, organizing the files on my laptop while she watched a rerun of an old cooking show. Do you remember the day you moved in with me after your mother died? She asked suddenly. I paused, then nodded. I remember the silence in the car. Dad didn't even look back. My grandmother exhaled slowly. That day you asked me if love always feels like being left behind. What did you say? I said no. I turned toward her. Were you lying? He gave me a long look, then smiled. Yes. But you needed to hear it. Julian called 5 times that night. Then he texted. We need to talk. Then. Don't run away from this, Elena. I stared at the screen and almost laughed. I wasn't running, I was building, stone by stone like a fortress with his name etched in the foundation. Instead of replying, I opened my email and attached all the evidence I had gathered. Recipient: Raymond.read@readgroup.com. Subject: Your wife has a second job, seducing mine. Sent. 2 days later, Julian showed up at my grandmother's front gate. Don't let him in, I told her. She peeked through the curtains. He brought lilies. Tell him I'm allergic. She laughed. You're not. I am now. She went outside and spoke to him for a few minutes. When she came back, she placed the flowers on the kitchen counter and said, He looks confused. Like someone just told him the sun doesn't rise in the east anymore. I shrugged. Good. Let him stand in the dark for once. The next bomb dropped over dinner when I logged into our shared cloud storage. Among the folders labeled Home Renovation and Vacation Plans, I found one innocently titled Miscellaneous Receipts. Inside were scanned copies of gift purchases, high-end bracelets, silk scarves, and perfume, not from brands I liked but brands Tessa always name-dropped. One receipt in particular caught my eye. A bracelet. White gold. $14,800. Julian's note in the margin. Tessa's birthday. She'll love it. My hands shook. Not because I was surprised, but because he didn't even bother to hide it. That night I didn't sleep. Instead I wrote a list. Not of his sins, I already knew those by heart, but of everything I'd sacrificed. I gave up a lucrative job offer in San Francisco to be his support system while he launched his firm. I hosted his family's endless brunches, smiled through every one of his cold apologies. I gave Tessa the benefit of the doubt more times than I could count, but I never gave myself an escape. Till now. When the sun rose the next morning, I had made my decision. I'm filing for divorce, I told my grandmother over toast. She didn't blink. I know, she said. I was just waiting for you to admit it out loud. I'm not going to tell Julian yet, I added. Not until I file formally. She reached over and squeezed my hand. Good. Let him read it the way he read your vows, late and with no intention of understanding them. In that moment I realized something. Tessa might have taken my father. She might have married into our money, stolen our home, and ruined my mother's life. But me. She underestimated me. And Julian? He thought I was his peace. But I'm the storm. Julian called 5 times that night. Then he texted. We need to talk. Then. Don't run away from this, Elena. I wasn't running. I was calculating. By morning the divorce petition was filed, publicly. Not out of pettiness but precision. A sealed copy went to Julian's firm. An unsealed version landed in 3 inboxes belonging to reputable media outlets. I didn't want quiet separation. I wanted a signal. Let the world know. The wife was done and the war had begun. Julian didn't call this time. He showed up. Late afternoon, same navy jacket, same expensive haircut. Same man who thought my silence was a loyalty he owned. He stood on the sidewalk outside my grandmother's garden gate holding something. A bouquet maybe. I didn't look closely. I watched through the curtains unseen. He paced. Waited. Still thinking this was temporary. Still thinking I'd cool down like I always did. He didn't know yet that I'd never felt colder in my life. Not frozen but forged. Something had clicked inside me finally. This wasn't heartbreak. This was clarity. And clarity doesn't wait. That evening I received the first surprise. A text from an unknown number. Photo attached. Tessa, curled up on Julian's velvet couch wearing one of his old hoodies like a trophy. Her feet tucked up under her like she lived there. In the background, the liquor cabinet reflecting just enough light to catch a blurred image of Julian walking past. No caption. None needed. She wanted me to see her there. To know she had replaced me, not quietly but smugly. I stared at the image for a moment, not blinking. Then I responded. You're wearing a man who just lost 60% of everything. Hope it fits. I never got a reply. But I didn't need one. Julian still didn't understand what I'd done. To him this was a tantrum. A warning shot. He didn't realize I'd already pulled the trigger. The lawsuit was more than a divorce filing. It included an official request for Julian's financial disclosures and a motion to trigger the conflict of interest clause in our prenup. The clause we wrote before the wedding. The clause that made any relationship with someone tied to my father, personal or professional, A breach. A clause Julian laughed off at the time. Now it would cost him over half of his holdings and dissolve key stock options in both his firm and Reed Enterprises. Not because I wanted the money. Because I wanted the message to be clear. He'd gambled on betrayal. And I was the dealer. My lawyer smiled as she clicked send on the first subpoena. Are you sure you want this in court? She asked. You know how this plays in the press. I'm counting on it, I said. I didn't need to speak to Julian to know how he was reacting. He'd be pacing, rattling legal pads, asking his assistant to check the clause again. There's got to be a way out. There wasn't. Because for the first time Julian Blake was on the wrong side of control. And Tessa? She stayed in his penthouse, playing the part of the wounded, misunderstood woman who just needed a place to stay. She told the press nothing, but I knew her better than that. She didn't care about silence. He cared about winning. She thought she was still ahead. She didn't see the floor cracking under her yet. I leaked a single surgical detail to the press. A receipt for a bracelet Julian bought weeks ago, complete with his handwritten note. For Tessa. You'll always be the one who understands. Published by High Court Life, tucked neatly under the headline, Gifts of the Guilty. Inside the lavish spending behind the Monroe-Blake split. The next day Julian's firm issued a rushed statement. The personal lives of our partners do not reflect company policy. Translation: we're trying to figure out how to distance ourselves before the investors start pulling out. That night, while Julian dealt with his hemorrhaging public image, I sat with my grandmother again. Both of us in silence, sipping tea under soft lamplight. You think they'll regret it? Asked finally. Eventually, she said. But it won't matter by then. I nodded. Good. Julian's last message came that night. You're going to destroy everything. I stared at it for a moment, then typed back. I already did. You just haven't looked down yet. I didn't hear from him after that. The message had gone quiet. No calls. No texts. No press releases. Which is exactly why I knew what was coming next. Julian had always been predictable in one way. He waited until the world stopped spinning before trying to clean the wreckage. And when he realized nothing he said from a distance would work, he did what all cowards do when they're losing. He showed up in person. It was just after 4 p.m. Late summer sun spilled across my grandmother's porch, casting long golden shadows across the ivy that curled up the railing. I was trimming the ends of her rosemary bush when I saw the black sedan crawl up the gravel path. Julian stepped out like nothing had changed. Like we were just two people having a disagreement, not a betrayal scorched into headlines. He walked up the steps slowly. No flowers this time. No gifts. Just a stiff jaw and a look that almost passed for regret. Elena, he said, stopping a few feet from me. We need to talk. I stood still, shears in hand. There's nothing left to explain, Julian. Don't do that, he said, voice tense. Don't pretend I don't deserve a real conversation. I raised an eyebrow. Now you want real. After everything. He exhaled sharply, trying to keep his temper down. You blindsided me. The lawsuit, the press, the prenup clause. You acted like I was some stranger you wanted to ruin. I met his eyes. You're a stranger. The man I married never would have handed me a glass of wine from my stepmother on the day my mother died. He looked away, jaw tightening. You're still angry about that toast? That night. It wasn't malicious. It was just awkward timing. Awkward, I repeated quietly. You think forgetting the anniversary of my mother's death, the day you promised to honor with me every year, was awkward? I didn't forget, he said quickly. Things were busy. The IPO, the event. Tessa organized the whole thing. She organized it because you let her. You let her take control of a day that never belonged to her. He shook his head. I didn't mean for it to. You let her give a toast on that day, I said, voice steady. You let her raise a glass to herself in my mother's house, on the day I lit a candle for the woman who raised me. And you looked at me across that room like I was overreacting. He stepped forward, lowering his voice. I thought we were stronger than that. That was when I laughed. Not loudly. Just enough to feel how far the ache had traveled. You thought we were stronger than your silence. Than your cowardice. Than your willingness to protect the wrong woman, again and again. Elena, I was trying to keep peace. You and Tessa. There is no me and Tessa, I cut in. There's just me. And there's the woman you let manipulate you while you treated me like a liability. The wind rustled through the rosemary, sharp and fragrant. Julian looked smaller now. Not physically but somehow hollowed. He searched my face like he was still trying to find the version of me who might forgive him. But that woman was gone. "What happened to us?" he asked quietly. "You stopped protecting me," I said. "And I started protecting myself." He looked like he wanted to speak again, but the words didn't come. Just a twitch in his jaw. A clench in his hands. "You don't trust me anymore," he said finally. "I don't respect you anymore," I replied. That landed deeper than anything else. I saw it in his face, the way it cracked him open. Respect. That was always Julian's currency. More than love, more than power. He could beg for forgiveness. He couldn't live without being admired. No. I didn't admire him. I pitied him. And he knew it. He didn't try to argue. He just stood there for a long time, shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen before. Then he nodded once, as if finally accepting that there was no salvage crew coming. "I guess I deserved this," he said. I didn't answer. As he did. He turned and walked back toward the car. For the first time in our entire marriage, he looked uncertain in his own skin. When the engine faded down the driveway, my grandmother stepped out behind me, silent until the dust settled. "You sure that's the end of it?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "He just doesn't know it yet." Julian never returned after that final conversation. No apology. No message. No surprise ambush at my grandmother's gate. For once he did the one thing I never thought he was capable of. He stayed away. Maybe he thought silence was noble now. Maybe he finally understood how much he'd broken. Or maybe, most likely, he was just waiting for the whole thing to quietly conclude, for me to quietly sign away 10 years of my life so he could move on and spin the PR his way. Let him try. The date was set. Neutral legal grounds, a white glass firm nestled in Midtown Manhattan, known for clean exits and non-disclosure packages that made headlines disappear. 11 a.m. sharp. I arrived at 10:40. I didn't bring anyone. No assistant, no cousin with a rage playlist, no legal entourage. Just me. That was enough. I wore a soft gray wool coat that fell below the knee, gold stud earrings and black flats. No makeup beyond concealer and mascara. Clean. Disarmed. Not there to perform, there to finish. The receptionist offered me lemon water. I declined. "Elena Monroe?" she asked. "Yes. Your party will be joining shortly." I smiled faintly. I imagine they will. The waiting room was cold in that polished modern way. White leather chairs. Chrome accents. The kind of silence that doesn't invite conversation. I sat by the window and looked out over the skyline, the same city Julian once told me he'd conquer. "One day this view will be mine," he'd said once, with an arm around my waist and a champagne flute in the other hand. No. This city didn't even look back. At 11:14 a.m. they arrived. Julian entered first, shoulders squared, tie slightly loosened. His coat was tailored, but it didn't sit right today, like even his posture had doubts. No folder. No flowers. No pen. Behind him, like a delayed echo, came Tessa. She wore white. A pressed, floor-length winter white coat with gold buttons and a silk scarf looped loosely around her neck. Her blonde hair was styled in those overly perfect waves, the kind that take 3 hours to look natural. Her sunglasses were oversized, her expression trembling just enough to suggest vulnerability. A full costume production. She stepped into the room like a grieving widow at a memorial for a man she never married. "Oh, I'm sorry," she whispered to the receptionist, her voice shaking theatrically. "It's just such a difficult day." She blinked rapidly, producing a single glistening tear that didn't quite fall. I stared directly at her. No emotion. No words. Just stillness. We were called into the conference room. High ceilings. Polished mahogany table. 2 folders placed exactly opposite each other. 3 pens. Water glasses. A decorative vase with sterile white orchids that looked allergic to warmth. Julian sat across from me. Tessa stood behind him, like some deranged bridesmaid waiting to catch a bouquet that never came. The lawyer began reading the terms, voice dry, flat, as if going through a standard process. Which it was. To him. I tuned most of it out. I already knew what was in the documents. I helped write them. What I listened for wasn't the legal language. It was the silence between Julian and me. He didn't speak. Didn't meet my eyes either. Just sat there with a furrowed brow, like a man realizing the map he'd followed had led him straight into a minefield. Tessa dabbed her eye again with a silk handkerchief embroidered with her initials. A detail I wouldn't have noticed if she hadn't exaggerated the gesture so painfully. She kept glancing at me, seeking attention, relevance, a reaction, and eventually she got one. Because when the lawyer paused to adjust the phrasing of a clause, Tessa leaned in slightly and whispered to me with a sweetness so artificial it could rot your teeth. "Don't worry, Elena. I'll take good care of what's left." It was like watching someone smile through a mask while holding a knife behind their back. I stood, calm, graceful, unbothered, and I slapped her. Once. Open palm. Clean contact. The sound cracked through the room like a pistol. She gasped, loud, dramatic, one hand flying to her cheek as if I'd fired a bullet. The assistant outside knocked on the glass in panic. The lawyer stood halfway from his chair. Tessa staggered back a step. And then I slapped her again. Harder. Right across the other cheek. For balance. "Are you insane?" she shrieked, eyes wide now. Not misty, not trembling, just feral. I leaned in slightly, voice low and steady. "No. I'm just finally done pretending you're worth speaking to." She stared at me, mouth open. Julian didn't say a word. He didn't get up. Didn't reach for her. Didn't scold me. He didn't even flinch. He just sat there, hands folded in front of him, watching. And for the first time I saw it in his eyes. He understood. He understood what he'd created by choosing her. He saw the woman sitting across from him, no longer the wife he could pacify with apologies and weekend trips, but someone sharper, colder, far more deliberate. He saw me and I saw the fear in his recognition. Not fear of violence. Fear of irrelevance. The lawyer finally cleared his throat. "Shall we continue?" I nodded, serene as ever, and sat back down. I picked up the pen. Black ink. No hesitation. Elena Monroe. Straight line. No loops. No flourish. No second thoughts. Julian signed next. His hands looked steadier than I expected, but I noticed the pause. That half-second stall before the pen touched the page. Like he knew this wasn't just a document. It was a death certificate. Not of a marriage. Of the version of me he thought would always wait. When it was done, I stood. Tessa was still holding her cheek, red blooming under her expensive concealer. I looked at her one last time. No malice. Just truth. "This wasn't revenge," I said quietly. It was restraint. Her eyes narrowed. I turned and walked out. The air outside was cold and clear. The street hummed with the late morning rhythm of New York. Taxis, laughter, impatient horns, lives moving forward. There were no reporters. No crowd. No press-staged performance. Just pavement, sky, and space. I didn't look back. Didn't need to. Somewhere behind me the final scene had ended. The actors were left standing on a darkened stage with no audience to clap for them. I reached the corner and paused. Breathed in. Felt the winter sun on my face. Then I smiled. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped playing their game. The divorce finalized 2 weeks after the signing. No headlines. No celebratory champagne. Just a discreet email confirming the filing was complete and the agreement had been sealed by the court. 10 years of marriage. Undone with a PDF. I didn't cry. I didn't feel much of anything. I had walked through the fire. What was left of me no longer burned. The news broke 2 days later. Raymond Reed, founder of Reed Corporation, arrested for securities fraud and misappropriation of investor funds. The article was brief, clinical in tone, but scathing in implications. The photograph showed Raymond in handcuffs, head lowered as he was escorted into a waiting black SUV outside his Westchester estate. His once prized cufflinks, platinum with tiny diamonds, glinted like iron shackles. By noon, Reed Corporation's stock was in free fall. By nightfall, the board had issued an emergency statement, distancing themselves from Raymond and promising a full internal audit. But the truth was simpler than any press release could admit. The empire was already rotten. Just needed the right push. And I had been pushing for a long time. 3 years to be exact. Long before Julian's betrayal, long before Tessa slipped her way into our lives with expensive smiles and fake laughter, I had already begun laying the groundwork. It started with whispers, questions in meetings, audits that didn't add up, files that mysteriously disappeared or got duplicated. Then came the subtle disobedience. A hiring freeze here, a failed product launch there, investor notes shuffled out of order, legal memos redirected to the wrong inboxes. I wasn't reckless. I was precise. They never suspected me. Why would they? To them, I was still the obedient daughter-in-law, the graceful hostess, the woman who planned galas and smiled quietly while Raymond took credit for my ideas. But I knew what was buried under the surface of that company. I knew the offshore accounts, the fake subsidiaries, the numbers that didn't balance no matter how you spun them. And while they were busy underestimating me, I was building my case. One file at a time. When I walked away from Julian, I didn't just walk away with my dignity. I walked away with documentation, signatures, board memos, and enough email chains to bury them all. I gave it to the SEC myself. I didn't need revenge. I just wanted the truth to finally matter. Raymond's arrest was only the beginning. Tessa's fall came next, and it was faster than I anticipated. Without Reed Corp propping up her lifestyle, the bottom dropped out in weeks. Her credit lines vanished. The country club cut her loose. Half her designer wardrobe was seized as frozen assets, pending investigation. The Manhattan condo she flaunted on social media was suddenly under bank control. And the best part? She couldn't even publicly play the victim. Because technically she had no legal standing. No marriage. No name on the assets. No protections. Just an expensive wardrobe and a sinking ship with her aboard. He came to me on a Friday. Unannounced. Uninvited. It was mid-afternoon. I was at the Monroe Foundation's city office, finalizing a grant approval for women in STEM. The receptionist buzzed through. "Elena, there's a Miss Tessa Reed here to see you. She says it's urgent." I didn't respond for 3 full seconds. Then calmly said, "Let her in." She looked nothing like the woman I'd last seen at the divorce signing. Gone was the pristine coat, the flawless makeup, the icy confidence. She looked brittle. Desperate. Her cheeks were drawn, eyes bloodshot, roots showing beneath her once glamorous hair. She clutched a worn leather handbag like it was all she had left. "Elena," she breathed. "Please." I didn't offer her a seat. She stumbled forward, hands trembling. "You have to help me. They've frozen everything. I have nowhere to go." "That sounds inconvenient," I said, voice cool. "I know what I did," she said quickly, eyes darting. "I know. I messed up. But I didn't know Raymond was doing that. And Julian, he's in hiding. He cut me off. I have no one left." "Good." She flinched. "Elena, I'm not asking for much. I need access to the condo. The Hamptons place. Something, anything." I tilted my head. "You think those are yours?" He swallowed. "They were gifts. I lived there. Temporary occupancy doesn't equal ownership. You know that, right?" Tessa's voice cracked. "I'm begging you." I let the silence stretch. "Then, you know what I remember most about you, Tessa?" She blinked. "That day at the lawyer's office. After 10 years of my marriage, 10 years of sacrifice and silence, you leaned in and said you'd take care of what was left. With that smug little smirk you always wore when you thought no one saw through you." Her face tightened. "Well," I said softly, "this is what's left." He stepped forward again, wild now. "I will go to the press. I will tell everyone what you did, how you set this up." I raised a hand and 2 of my private security guards stepped into the room. Both silent. Both massive. Tessa froze. "No one believes the woman who sold herself for monograms," I said quietly. "Especially not when she's got frozen assets and no press access." The guards flanked her. "Escort her out," I said simply. One of them touched her elbow. She jerked away but didn't resist. "Don't touch me," she snapped, but her voice broke halfway through. They led her out without a word. I watched until the door shut behind her. I stood there for a long moment. Not triumphant. Not smug. Just finished. It wasn't revenge. It was accountability. And maybe finally peace. Tessa's screams had barely faded from the hallway when my phone buzzed again. Another message. But not from her. This time it was Julian. "It's done. The IPO collapsed. I'm sorry. I'd still like to see you. Just once." I stared at the screen without blinking. There was no apology big enough. No collapse poetic enough. But the irony of it all made me pause. The timing, the desperation, the quiet request with nothing left behind it. I didn't respond. But I didn't block him either. 3 days later he showed up outside the Monroe Foundation building. Alone. Unshaven. His collar wrinkled, shoes scuffed. Nothing like the man who once stood beside me in tailored suits and shallow confidence. I saw him through the glass lobby doors. He waited for hours. I didn't go down. But I watched. When I finally agreed to meet him, I didn't do it for closure. I did it for the ghost of a woman I used to be, the one who once waited for him to remember something that should have mattered. We met at a quiet bench near the reservoir in Central Park, just before sunset. The sky was dusted in warm gold, but his presence brought no light. "Elena," he said when he saw me, rising too quickly like he wasn't sure I'd really come. I didn't greet him. I just sat. He took his place beside me and let the silence stretch between us. "It's all gone," he said eventually. "The IPO tanked the day after Dad's arrest hit the news. Investors pulled out. Shares plummeted. I tried everything. But the board dropped me this morning." I said nothing. He laughed bitterly. "The funny thing is, I think I was relieved." I still said nothing. "I kept thinking," he continued, voice rough, "about that night. The celebration. The toast. The birthday." He looked at me now, really looked. Julian's voice was quiet, almost broken when he finally said it. I knew. I turned to look at him, eyes steady. He didn't flinch. "I knew it was your mother's death anniversary that night," he said, his voice rough at the edges. "I remembered. I took you to Tessa's birthday. I stood there toasting her, laughing, holding her hand like it was just another night." He swallowed hard. Shame bloomed across his face like a bruise he couldn't hide. "I don't know what I was thinking," he whispered. "Maybe I wasn't thinking at all. Maybe some part of me believed you'd forgive me, like you always did. That you'd brush it off like the other times." His gaze dropped to the gravel at his feet. "I think I started taking you for granted without even realizing it. Little by little. I just assumed you'd always be there. That you'd wait for me to come around." He looked up again, and this time he looked wrecked. "I didn't even notice when I crossed the line. When I stopped being the man who protected your heart and became the one who chipped away at it." His voice cracked. His jaw tightened to hold it in. "I failed you," he said finally, barely above a whisper. "And I don't think I deserve your forgiveness. I just needed you to know I see it now. All of it." His eyes were glassy. But I didn't move. Silence. It lasted longer than he could handle. "I went to the cemetery," he added. "I wanted to see her grave. I wanted to stand where I should have been standing with you. I want to go back with you." He turned toward me, eyes pleading. "Let me go with you, Elena. Let me honor her. It's late, I know. But I'm here now." I turned to face him fully. And for the first time in months I spoke directly. "No." Just one word. His mouth parted in disbelief. I continued, voice low but steady. "You don't get to stand with me in grief. You stepped over to light someone else's candles." He flinched. "I didn't mean." "No, he didn't. That's the problem. He never meant to hurt me. He just forgot me. Bit by bit. Until there was nothing left to remember." He opened his mouth again, but I cut him off. "I used to think you were different from my father," I said. "But I was wrong. You didn't need to raise your voice or your hand to become him. All it took was your silence. Your absence when it mattered." His shoulders dropped. Not in anger. In defeat. There was nothing left to say. No letter. No grand apology. No broken IPO could rewrite what he'd erased of me. He stood slowly, the light behind him casting a long, thin shadow across the gravel path. "I never meant to become him," he said almost to himself. I didn't respond. I just looked out over the water, calm and glassy, reflecting a sky he was no longer part of. He left without another word. And I didn't look back. Some memories are better left buried. Even when they finally remember you. Too late. It happened suddenly. Tessa was running. Not metaphorically for once, but literally running down a rain-slick street in Midtown. 2 debt collectors had been following her since morning, and someone said she'd been trying to pawn a watch that wasn't hers. The car came from the left. Fast. Sharp turn. No chance to stop. They say it was instant. No pain. Just impact. Glass, pavement, silence. I didn't go to the funeral. There wasn't one. No one claimed her body for days. No statements from the Reed family, no obituary in the Times. Just a small article buried inside the fourth page of a gossip site. Tessa Vexley, former heiress, dies at 29. Once known for her tabloid presence and high-profile affair with Julian Reed, she had recently fallen out of the public eye following financial scandal and legal turmoil. And just like that she was gone. Like she'd never happened. Like her chaos hadn't once touched every corner of my life. I didn't cry. Not out of cruelty. Just clarity. Because grief needs presence. And Tessa had only ever been noise. Julian's fall came slower but just as final. After the IPO collapse, his reputation never recovered. No one in the industry wanted to touch a man whose father was in prison, whose girlfriend was dead, and whose wife had dismantled him without ever raising her voice. The press stopped calling. The last image I saw of him was a grainy photo. Julian leaving what looked like a midtown legal office, coat wrinkled, hair graying, head lowered. He wasn't worth the ink anymore. His world didn't explode. Emptied. The way power does when it's built on paper and denial. Me. I didn't rebuild. I rewrote. I still live in my grandmother's home, the one with creaky floors and hydrangeas along the fence. The neighborhood boys wave when they bike past. I know the name of the florist on the corner. I sleep with the windows cracked open now. I walk to work most mornings. The Monroe Foundation thrives, but I keep its growth quiet. We've opened 3 shelters, 2 after-school programs, and an internship pipeline for women who were once silenced like me, made small by men who used love as leverage and ambition as a leash. My mother would be proud. I used to wonder what justice looked like. Now I know. It looks like peace. On the first anniversary of my divorce, I took a slow walk to my mother's grave. Alone. I brought 2 white tulips and no expectations. I sat with her for a while. Told her everything. Or maybe nothing. Sometimes silence is the most honest conversation. The wind picked up gently. Not harsh. Not cold. Just present. The way real love is. The kind that asks nothing. The kind that stays. When I returned home that evening, my grandmother was waiting on the porch with 2 cups of tea and her old radio humming soft jazz. She smiled when she saw me. "You look like someone who's finally breathing her own air," she said. "I am," I replied, setting the flowers by the door. For the first time in a long time. We sat for a while in the hush of early evening, the sky slowly bleeding from gold to gray. No calls. No apologies. No letters I'd never sent. Just freedom. The quiet, steady kind you earn when you choose yourself and never hand your worth over again. They thought they'd taught me loss. I returned the lesson in full. The end. 3 years together. 3 years wasted. Daniel never proposed. Instead he chose my sweet, backstabbing cousin. So I set my sights higher. Much higher. Now as I walk down the aisle toward his billionaire suite, Daniel's face is priceless. Revenge isn't just sweet. It's dressed in couture and paid for with his inheritance. The candlelight flickered between us, casting dancing shadows across Daniel's face. That handsome face I'd woken up to for 3 years. My fingers traced the rim of my wineglass as I studied him across the table at La Perla, the most expensive restaurant in the city. I'd worn the black Versace dress he loved, the one that hugged every curve just right. My makeup was flawless, lips painted that perfect shade of red he always said drove him wild. Tonight was supposed to be special. Tonight was supposed to be the night he finally proposed after 3 damn years of waiting. But something was wrong. I saw it in the way his fingers drummed nervously against the white tablecloth. In how his eyes kept darting around the room instead of meeting mine. The way he'd barely touched his steak, though it was cooked exactly how he liked it. "Daniel," I said, my voice smooth as the expensive Cabernet in my glass. "You're acting strange." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. That's when I knew. That tiny tell of his I'd memorized over the years. The way his throat worked when he was about to say something difficult. "Elena, we need to talk." I didn't react. 3 years ago I might have panicked. 2 years ago I might have cried. But the woman sitting across from him now simply took a slow sip of wine, letting the rich flavor roll across my tongue before responding. "We're talking now." His hands clenched into fists on the table. "I've been seeing someone else." The words hung in the air between us. I didn't blink. Didn't flinch. just watched as sweat beaded at his temples despite the restaurant's perfect climate control. Who? My voice was calm, measured. He looked down at his plate. Sophia. A slow smile curved my lips. Not because I found it funny, but because the sheer audacity of it was almost impressive. My own cousin. The same Sophia who'd slept on our couch last winter when her apartment flooded. The same Sophia who'd borrowed my clothes, my jewelry, who I'd comforted through 2 breakups. How long? For months. I laughed then, a soft, chilling sound that made the couple at the next table glance over nervously. For months. While I'd been patiently waiting for a ring, he'd been fucking my cousin. While I'd been turning down promotions to stay in the city for him, he'd been whispering sweet nothings to Sophia. I set my wineglass down with deliberate precision, the crystal making barely a sound against the linen. Tell me, Daniel. Did you think I wouldn't find out? His eyes finally met mine and I saw it, the fear. Good. He should be afraid. It just happened, he stammered. We didn't plan it. She's just so different from you. Different how? I tilted my head, genuinely curious. His softer. Easier. She doesn't. He trailed off, realizing too late how this sounded. Doesn't challenge you? I supplied. Doesn't expect you to be better than you are. My smile widened. You're right. I'm not like Sophia at all. I stood slowly, reaching for my clutch. Daniel's hand shot out to grab my wrist. Elena, please. I looked down at his fingers wrapped around my arm, then back up at him with a gaze so cold he immediately let go. You made your choice, Daniel. Now live with it. As I walked out of the restaurant, heads turned to watch me go. I held my spine straight, my heels clicking a steady rhythm against the marble floor. The hostess gave me a sympathetic look as I passed. Miss your coat. Keep it, I said without breaking stride. The night air hit my face as I stepped outside, crisp and bracing. I inhaled deeply, feeling something shift inside me. The pain was there, yes. The humiliation. The betrayal. But beneath it all, something far more powerful was taking root. Purpose. I pulled out my phone and opened a rideshare app, my fingers steady as I typed in my destination. Not my apartment hours. No, that chapter was closed. Instead, I entered the address of the most exclusive hotel in the city. As the black town car pulled up, I slid inside, already making mental lists. First, I would need to move my things. Then I would need to make some calls. And finally, most importantly, I would need to learn everything there was to know about Alexander Hartwell. Daniel's uncle. The CEO of Hartwell and Company. And, if I played my cards right, my ticket to the sweetest revenge imaginable. The car pulled away from the curb, the restaurant disappearing behind me. In the darkened window, my reflection smiled back at me, cold, calculating, and utterly in control. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The penthouse suite at the Loron was exactly what I needed. Cold, impersonal, and ruthlessly expensive. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the glittering city skyline, but I barely glanced at the view as I dropped my clutch onto the marble console table. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the climate control system. Perfect. No distractions. No memories. Just the crisp, sterile environment I required to begin my work. I slipped off my heels, the plush carpet swallowing my footsteps as I moved toward the minibar. The crystal decanter of bourbon caught the ambient light, and I poured 2 fingers neat, the amber liquid swirling as I carried it to the desk. My laptop booted up with a soft chime, the screen's glow sharp against my face. First, I disabled all my social media accounts. No emotional posts. No vague quotes about betrayal. Just a clean, professional disappearance. Then I drafted an email to my landlord terminating my lease effective immediately. No explanation, just the legally required notice and a wire transfer for the penalty fee. The apartment Daniel and I had shared could burn for all I cared. Next, I opened a new browser window and typed 2 words. Alexander Hartwell. The search results populated instantly. CEO of Hartwell and Company. Estimated net worth. $2.1 billion. Age, 38. Education, Harvard then Stanford MBA. The photos showed a man who carried his power effortlessly, sharp jawline shadowed with perpetual stubble, ice blue eyes that seemed to dissect everything in their path, broad shoulders that filled out his tailored suits with lethal precision. But what interested me most was the single line under personal life. Never married. No public relationships since 2019. I took a slow sip of bourbon, the burn grounding me. Daniel had always been desperate for his uncle's approval. Xander Hartwell was the reason he'd gotten his job at the firm, the reason he still had any semblance of a career despite his chronic mediocrity. And now he would be the reason Daniel lost everything. A notification pinged on my phone. Sylvia. Elena, please call me. We need to talk. I deleted the message without responding. Instead, I opened another tab and pulled up the guest list for tomorrow night's charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum. The Hartwell Foundation was a premier sponsor, which meant Xander would be there. And thanks to my former position at Vantage PR, I still had contacts who could get me in. 3 quick calls later, I had an invitation and a borrowed couture gown being delivered by morning. I set down my glass and stood walking to the window. The city stretched before me, a chessboard of possibilities. Daniel thought he had won by trading up for a softer, simpler woman. But he'd forgotten one crucial truth. I didn't lose. I evolved. And by this time tomorrow, I'd be holding Xander Hartwell's attention in the palm of my hand, right where Daniel would have to watch. The Metropolitan Museum's Temple of Dender glowed under strategically placed spotlights, the ancient stones humming with the vibrations of a string quartet. I stood at the top of the marble steps, letting the night air lick at my exposed shoulders as I surveyed the crowd below. My borrowed Dior gown, a liquid column of onyx silk, clung to every curve before plunging into a backless descent that would make even a saint's fingers twitch. The diamond cuffs at my wrists weren't costume jewelry, but actual heirlooms from my PR firm's vault, secured for tonight's performance with a 6-figure insurance policy. A champagne flute materialized in my periphery. "You look like you're hunting," murmured Lillian Choi, my former colleague from Vantage, her red lips barely moving as she passed me the glass. I took it without looking. "I am." Below us, the cream of New York's elite swirled in predictable patterns. Politicians clustered near the open bar. Socialites preened under the Instagram-ready lighting. And there, near the 2nd century BC relief carving, stood my prey, Alexander Hartwell holding court with 3 silver-haired men who reeked of old money and Senate connections. Even from this distance I could see why Forbes kept putting him on their covers. The man wore his power like a second skin, his Brioni tuxedo doing nothing to soften the predatory grace in his stance. Lillian followed my gaze. "Oh hell no. You can't be serious." I sipped my champagne, letting the bubbles burst against my tongue. "Watch me." I timed my descent perfectly. Not directly toward him. That would be amateurish. Instead, I let the natural current of the crowd carry me past the Egyptian sarcophagus, pausing to admire it just as Xander's group began dispersing. When I turned, our collision appeared accidental. My champagne splashed across his shirt front in a perfect arc. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Xander looked down at the spreading stain, then up at me through unfairly thick lashes. I watched his eyes perform the expected journey, shock, irritation, then masculine appreciation as he took in the full effect of my dress. "Mr. Hartwell," I breathed, pressing a hand to my throat. "I'm so terribly sorry." A waiter materialized with a towel. Xander took it without looking, his gaze locked on mine. "Do I know you?" "Elena Moretti." I didn't offer my hand. "Though you might know me as the woman who made your nephew cry last week." His fingers stilled on the towel. A muscle jumped in his jaw. I leaned in close enough to smell his cologne, bergamot and something dangerously dark. "Ask Daniel why his girlfriend of 3 years dumped him at La Perla. Then decide if you still want this conversation." Turning on my heel, I walked away without glancing back. The trick with sharks. You had to make them chase you. The museum's private lounge hummed with the low murmur of curated conversations, the scent of aged whiskey and expensive perfume clinging to the air like a promise. I stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching my reflection in the glass, a study in calculated nonchalance. The diamond cuffs at my wrists caught the light with every deliberate movement as I swirled my second glass of champagne. I hadn't turned around once in the 23 minutes since our accidental encounter. A server materialized at my elbow with fresh hors d'oeuvres. "The foie gras torchon with black truffle, ma'am." I selected one with precisely 2 fingers, noting how the delicate porcelain plate trembled slightly in the young man's grip. "Thank you." My gaze flickered to his name tag. "Jonathan." His Adam's apple bobbed. "How did you?" The Hartwell Foundation always hires catering staff from Lou Bernardine for these events. I took a measured bite, letting the rich flavors dissolve on my tongue before continuing. And you have the same nervous tell as their junior sous chef I interviewed last spring. The poor boy nearly dropped his tray. A deep voice cut through the moment like a knife through silk. That's quite the party trick. I didn't need to turn to know Xander Hartwell stood exactly 2 paces behind me, close enough to establish dominance, far enough to feign plausible deniability. The hairs on my nape rose as his shadow merged with mine in the window's reflection. Observation isn't a trick, Mr. Hartwell. I took another sip of champagne. It's survival. He stepped into my periphery, his ruined shirt now replaced with one so crisp it nearly glowed under the museum lighting. Up close, I could see the faint scar bisecting his left eyebrow, a detail no magazine photo had ever captured. You cost me a $15,000 shirt. I turned fully then, letting him absorb the full effect of my gown's plunging backline. And Daniel cost me 3 years of my life. My smile showed just the edge of teeth. I'd say you're still getting the better deal. The string quartet shifted to a Debussy piece. Around us, the crowd's energy pulsed in predictable waves. Socialites tittering near the bar, investors debating near the Rodin sculpture, and there, by the grand entrance, Daniel's unmistakable frame frozen mid-step with Sophia clinging to his arm like a cheap shawl. Xander followed my gaze. Ah. The single syllable held volumes. I watched with clinical detachment as Daniel's face cycled through shock, panic, and finally, deliciously, dawning horror as he recognized both me and his uncle in the same sightline. Sophia's grip tightened on his arm, her rose-pink Valentino gown suddenly looking garish under the museum lights. Xander's voice dropped to a rumble only I could hear. You orchestrated this. Of course. I finished my champagne in one smooth swallow. But the real question is, are you going to send me away for embarrassing your nephew? I tilted my head, exposing the delicate line of my throat. Or are you going to ask me to dance to really make him sweat? The music swelled. The crowd blurred. And for the first time all evening, Xander Hartwell smiled. A slow, dangerous curve of lips that promised retribution of the most exquisite kind. His hand closed around mine, calloused fingers burning through my silk glove. You play a dangerous game, Ms. Moretti. I let him pull me toward the dance floor, my laugh a whisper against his jaw. You have no idea. The moment Xander's hand settled at the small of my back, I knew I'd won the first round. His palm burned through the delicate silk of my gown like a brand, fingers splaying possessively as the quartet transitioned into a waltz. The crowd parted instinctively, no one interrupted a Hartwell when he moved with purpose. We stepped into the rhythm with perfect synchronicity, my body aligning with his as if we'd danced together for years. His lead was firm, unyielding, the kind of control that came from a lifetime of commanding boardrooms and bending the world to his will. I matched him step for step, my spine straight, chin lifted just enough to force his gaze downward. You're good, he murmured, his breath warm against my temple. I know. I let my fingers trail lightly up his lapel, noting the accelerated pulse beneath my fingertips. Daniel never could keep up with me either. His grip tightened almost imperceptibly. This isn't about Daniel. Of course not. I spun outward on his arm, the skirt of my gown flaring before he reeled me back in closer than before. Our chests nearly brushed, the heat between us palpable. This is about the way your board members keep staring at us. The way your CFO just spilled his drink watching you dance with the woman who destroyed your nephew's relationship. Xander's lips twitched. You didn't destroy anything. My nephew did that himself when he cheated. I arched a brow. So you did ask him about La Perla. His hand slid lower, pressing me flush against him as we turned in a slow circle. I know everything worth knowing about you, Elena Moretti. Your Princeton degree. Your meteoric rise at Vantage PR. The fact you turned down a promotion at Bauer Media last month. His thumb traced dangerous circles just above the swell of my hip. What I don't know is why you're here. The music swelled, strings vibrating through my bones. Over Xander's shoulder, I watched Daniel whisper frantically to a waiter, no doubt trying to ascertain whether his uncle was merely being polite or genuinely interested in his ex. Sophia hovered nearby, her smile growing increasingly strained as society wives deliberately turned their backs on her. I brought my lips to Xander's ear, my voice a velvet whisper. I'm here because you haven't looked at another woman since we collided an hour ago. Because every powerful man in this room is wondering who I am to command Alexander Hartwell's undivided attention. My teeth grazed his earlobe, feeling him shudder. And because watching Daniel realize his uncle wants what he threw away, I pulled back just enough to meet his gaze. That's just the opening act. The music ended with a flourish. Around us, polite applause broke out. Xander didn't release me. His eyes, those impossible blue eyes, darkened with something far more dangerous than lust. Recognition. The realization that he'd finally met someone who played the game as well as he did. Tomorrow, he said abruptly. My office. 9 a.m. I stepped back with a slow smile. I don't work for you, Mr. Hartwell. His lips curved as he reached into his breast pocket and produced a single black card embossed with gold lettering. No, he agreed, pressing it into my palm. But you will. I glanced down at the offer. Creative Director, Hartwell Media Group. Salary, triple my current rate. Reporting directly to the CEO. Across the room, Daniel finally caught sight of the exchange, his face draining of color. I tucked the card into my bodice, letting my fingers linger just a beat too long. See you at 9. The elevator doors slid open with a hushed whisper, revealing the penthouse executive suite of Hartwell Tower. My Louboutins sank into plush ivory carpet as I stepped into the silent reception area, the morning sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased all of Manhattan at my feet. A sleek titanium desk stood empty, no assistant yet at this hour, but the double doors at the far end were slightly ajar. I didn't knock. Xander stood with his back to me, phone pressed to his ear as he stared out over the city. His tailored navy suit stretched across broad shoulders, the fabric pulling taut as he braced one hand against the glass. Don't care what the board thinks, Richard. The acquisition happens today or not at all. His voice was low, lethal. The kind of tone that made billion-dollar deals tremble. I let my portfolio drop onto the conference table with a deliberate thud. He turned slowly, those glacial eyes flickering over my tailored white sheath dress, the way it hugged every curve before ending just above the knee. My hair was pulled back in a severe chignon, lips painted the same dangerous red as last night. Professional. Polished. Irresistible. He hung up without another word. Miss Moretti. His gaze dropped to the slim Cartier watch on my wrist. A piece I'd specifically chosen because I knew he owned the same model. You're early. I crossed to the wet bar and poured myself a black coffee from the waiting carafe. No cream. No sugar. Exactly how he took his. And you're predictable. I took a slow sip, watching his jaw tighten. The job offer was clever, but we both know you didn't bring me here to discuss marketing strategies. A muscle ticked in his cheek. Why did I bring you here? Setting down the cup, I reached into my portfolio and slid a manila folder across the glass tabletop. Because of this. Xander didn't move. What is it? Open it and find out. For a long moment we stood locked in a battle of wills, the air between us crackling with unspoken challenges. Finally he strode forward and flipped open the folder. His expression didn't change as he scanned the first page, then the second. But I saw it. The minute dilation of his pupils, the slight hitch in his breathing. The documents detailed every mistake Daniel had ever made at Hartwell and Company. The botched Tokyo deal. The insider trading near-miss last spring. The embezzlement scheme he'd overlooked in the London office. One that would have cost the company millions if Elena hadn't uncovered it during her research. Xander's voice was dangerously quiet when he finally looked up. You're blackmailing me. I laughed, low and throaty. Don't be dramatic. I'm saving you. Moving around the table, I traced a finger along the edge of his desk. Imagine how this looks if it leaks before the IPO. Especially coming from the CEO's nephew. I paused, letting the implication hang between us. Or imagine how loyal I could be as your new creative director, and occasional dinner companion. His hand shot out, catching my wrist and pulling me flush against him. The heat of his body seared through my dress as his other hand came up to cradle my jaw, thumb brushing my lower lip. You're playing with fire. I tilted my face up, my breath mingling with his. Then burn with me. The knock at the door came precisely at 9 a.m. We were 3 feet apart when Daniel walked in. The air in Xander's office turned to ice as Daniel froze in the doorway, his hand still gripping the brass knob. His eyes darted between us. Xander's imposing frame looming over my seated position at the conference table, my manicured fingers resting atop the damning file. A vein pulsed visibly at his temple. "Uncle Xander," he choked out, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "What is she doing here?" I crossed my legs slowly, letting my stiletto dangle from my toes as I leaned back in the leather chair. The morning sun caught the platinum band of my new Rolex, a gift from Xander that had arrived by courier at 7 a.m. "Good morning, Daniel. I'd say it's lovely to see you, but we both know I'm a terrible liar." Xander didn't move from his position behind me, his presence at my back a silent declaration of allegiance. "Elena is joining us as creative director. Effective immediately." Daniel's face cycled through shock, denial, and finally, deliciously, abject horror. "You can't be serious. After what you did?" I interrupted sweetly, tapping the file. "Funny you should mention that." I flipped open the folder and began reading aloud. February 14th. Daniel Hartwell approves payment to Shell Company later linked to. Enough. Daniel lunged forward, but Xander moved faster, intercepting him with a hand to the chest. "Careful, nephew." Xander's voice could have flash frozen the East River. "You're speaking to my new executive." The emphasis on my sent a thrill down my spine. Daniel recoiled as if struck. "You're sleeping with her." Xander's smile was all teeth. "Not yet." The words hung between us, a promise and a threat rolled into one. I watched with clinical fascination as Daniel's breathing grew erratic, his carefully constructed world crumbling in real time. His gaze dropped to the file again, then snapped up to mine with dawning comprehension. "You did this," he whispered. "You're trying to destroy me." I stood in one fluid motion, smoothing my skirt as I rounded the table to face him. "Oh, Daniel," I murmured, reaching up to adjust his crooked tie with mock tenderness. "If I wanted to destroy you, you'd already be in handcuffs." My fingers tightened abruptly, cutting off his airflow for one satisfying second before I released him. This is just me taking my pound of flesh." Xander's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then at me. "Board meeting in 5. I nodded, gathering my files. "I'll need to stop by HR first." Daniel found his voice as I brushed past him. "This isn't over." I paused in the doorway, tossing a smile over my shoulder. "For you." My gaze flicked meaningfully to Sophia waiting in the lobby, her face pale under cheap department store makeup. "I'd say it's just beginning." The elevator doors closed on his stricken face. The Hartwell Media Group boardroom smelled of aged leather and quiet power, the 20-foot mahogany table polished to a mirror shine. I took my seat at Xander's right hand, the brass nameplate gleaming with my new title. Elena Moretti, Creative Director. The chair was still warm from the previous occupant, a man who'd reportedly been escorted from the building an hour earlier with a security detail. Across the table, Daniel gripped his portfolio until his knuckles bleached white. The empty seat to his left, where his ally Richard Chin normally sat, remained conspicuously vacant. Xander didn't bother with pleasantries. "As of 9:15 this morning, we've terminated Richard Chin for breach of fiduciary duty." He tapped a key on the conference tablet, and the wall screens lit up with damning emails between Richard and a competitor. Elena uncovered the paper trail. 20 pairs of eyes swiveled to me. I smiled demurely, tapping my Montblanc pen against the proposal in front of me. It was almost too easy. Richard used his corporate email like a teenage girl uses TikTok. A ripple of uneasy laughter. Daniel's jaw clenched. Xander continued as if nothing had happened. "Which brings us to the London IPO. Elena." I stood, my stilettos sinking into the Persian rug as I moved to the presentation screen. With a swipe, I brought up my first slide. A complete rebrand of Hartwell Media's flagship news division. The old stodgy logo had been replaced with sleek modern typography. The color scheme shifted from institutional blue to a bold crimson. Daniel shot to his feet. "You can't just sit down." Xander's voice cracked like a whip. "Unless you'd like to join Richard in unemployment?" The room held its breath as Daniel slowly lowered himself back into his chair. I continued as if nothing had happened, highlighting the demographic research that proved my point. "We're bleeding millennial viewers because we're treating them like their grandparents. It's time to stop being polite and start being powerful." I advanced to the final slide, A provocative new tagline over Xander's face. Truth has a new enemy. The board members exchanged glances. Old man Wexler from legal cleared his throat. It's aggressive. Exactly. Xander stood, coming to stand shoulder to shoulder with me. Which is why we're implementing it immediately. And why Daniel will be transferring to the Sydney office to oversee the Asia-Pacific transition. Daniel's head snapped up. Sydney. I couldn't resist. Don't worry, I hear the beaches are lovely. Sophia will love it. The room erupted into murmurs. Sydney was a career graveyard, a polite way to exile incompetent executives. As the board debated, Xander leaned close enough that his breath stirred my hair. You're enjoying this too much. I turned slightly, letting my lips brush his ear. You have no idea. His hand found the small of my back under cover of the table, fingers pressing just hard enough to leave bruises. Dinner. Tonight. My penthouse. I pretended to consider. Only if you fire Daniel's favorite anchor first. Xander's smile was all teeth. Done. The elevator to Xander's penthouse didn't have buttons. Just a biometric scanner that recognized my palm print the moment I pressed my hand against the cold steel panel. The doors slid shut soundlessly, and as the car began its ascent, I caught my reflection in the mirrored walls. The slash of crimson silk clinging to my curves, the diamond choker at my throat winking under the recessed lighting. A far cry from the crisp white sheath I'd worn to destroy Daniel this morning. The elevator opened directly into his foyer, where the scent of sandalwood and slow-roasted lamb curled through the air. Xander stood silhouetted against the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Manhattan skyline glittering behind him like a spilled jewel box. He'd shed his suit jacket and tie, the top buttons of his dress shirt undone to reveal a hint of taut muscle beneath. A crystal tumbler dangled from his fingers, the ice cubes clinking softly as he turned. You're late. I stepped out of my heels, leaving them abandoned by the elevator doors as I crossed the marble floor. I was firing Jessica Cho. His eyebrow arched. Daniel's favorite anchor? I plucked the glass from his hand and took a sip. Bourbon aged 20 years with exactly 2 ice cubes. Just how I liked it. She cried. It was tedious. Xander's lips twitched. He reached out, catching a loose curl of my hair between his fingers. You're vicious. I set the glass down on the sideboard with deliberate care. You knew that when you hired me. His hand slid to the nape of my neck, fingers tangling in my hair as he pulled me flush against him. I didn't hire you for your ruthlessness, Elena. His mouth hovered a breath from mine. I hired you because you're the only person who doesn't fear me. The admission sent a thrill down my spine. I closed the distance, my lips brushing his in a whisper of a kiss. You should know, I murmured against his mouth. I have absolutely no intention of sleeping with you tonight. Xander stilled. I stepped back, trailing my fingers down his chest as I moved toward the dining table. Business first. I glanced over my shoulder, letting my smile sharpen. Then pleasure. The meal was a study in exquisite torture. Course after course appeared and disappeared. Seared scallops in brown butter, truffle-infused risotto, a chocolate torte that melted on the tongue, while Xander watched me with the focused intensity of a predator. We discussed the Sydney transition, the board's reaction to Daniel's demotion, the upcoming IPO. Every word was a chess move, every glance a challenge. By the time coffee was served, the tension between us could have powered the city grid. Xander set down his espresso cup with a quiet click. Why did you really take this job? I swirled the dark liquid in my cup, considering. Because you fascinate me. Not for revenge. Oh, that's just a bonus. I lifted my gaze to his. But you already knew that. He leaned forward, bracing his forearms on the table. What do you want, Elena? The question hung between us, loaded with possibilities. I stood, rounding the table until I stood behind his chair. My hands settled on his shoulders, feeling the muscle tense beneath my touch. Right now. I bent, my lips grazing the shell of his ear. I want you to beg. Xander's hand shot up, catching my wrist and yanking me into his lap. His eyes burned with something dark and dangerous. Careful, he growled. You might get exactly what you asked for. The morning light sliced through Xander's penthouse like a scalpel, painting gold stripes across the rumpled sheets where I sat sipping espresso from a delicate china cup. My phone buzzed incessantly on the nightstand. 23 missed calls from Daniel, 12 from Sophia, and a growing pile of notifications from the Hartwell Media PR team. I ignored them all, focusing instead on the Bloomberg terminal Xander kept in his bedroom, where the ticker showed Hartwell Media Group's stock price climbing steadily. Xander emerged from the shower with a towel slung low around his hips, water glistening on the hard planes of his chest. He took one look at my satisfied smirk in the terminal screen, then shook his head. You leaked the Sydney transfer before market open. I took another sip of espresso, letting the bitter warmth spread through me. And your stock is up 4%. You're welcome. He stalked toward me, his damp fingers curling around my bare ankle beneath the sheets. You're terrifying. Before he could pull me closer, my phone lit up with a call from an unknown number. I answered on speaker. Elena Moretti. Ms. Moretti, this is Cynthia Wells from the New York Times. The reporter's voice crackled with barely contained excitement. We're running a story about Daniel Hartwell's sudden transfer and wanted your comment as the new creative director. Xander's grip tightened on my ankle. I smiled sweetly. Daniel is an invaluable asset to Hartwell Media, and we're thrilled to have him spearheading our Asia-Pacific expansion. A beat of silence. That's not what our sources say. We have reports that you personally recommended his reassignment after uncovering. Off the record, Cynthia? I interrupted, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Check your inbox in 5 minutes. You'll want to update your story. I hung up and immediately dialed another number. Lillian? Release the photos. Xander's eyebrows shot up. What photos? The answer came in the form of Daniel's Instagram notifications blowing up my phone. I turned the screen toward Xander, where a now public series of images showed Daniel and Sophia in a compromising position. On his office desk, Hartwell Media logo clearly visible in the background. The timestamp? 2 days before he'd broken up with me. Xander exhaled sharply. Christ. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Lillian. Wall Street Journal just picked it up. Trending on Twitter. Sophia's already deleted her accounts. I set aside my espresso and stretched luxuriously. I'd say that's another 5% bump by noon. Xander's hands landed on either side of me, caging me against the headboard. His damp hair dripped onto my bare shoulders as he leaned in close. Remind me never to cross you. I wound my fingers through his towel, pulling him down. Oh, darling, I murmured against his lips. Where's the fun in that? The heavy cream envelope arrived by courier at precisely 8:03 a.m., its thick stock embossed with the Hartwell Media logo. I let it sit unopened on my desk for exactly 47 minutes, long enough for the entire executive floor to buzz with speculation, before slicing it open with my letter opener. The engraved card inside was predictably extravagant. Mr. Alexander Hartwell requests the pleasure of your company at the marriage of Elena Moretti to herself. Saturday the 15th of June. Hartwell Tower penthouse. I looked up to find Xander leaning against my office doorway, his tailored suit doing nothing to hide the predatory gleam in his eyes. Well, I traced the embossed lettering with one fingertip. A bit presumptuous, don't you think? He pushed off the doorframe and stalked toward me, his Italian loafers silent on the plush carpet. You've been planning this since the day you walked into La Perla. His palms flattened on my desk as he leaned in, close enough that I could see the flecks of silver in his irises. The job. The revenge. All of it leading here. I rose slowly, not breaking eye contact as I circled the desk. You forgot one thing. My fingers found the knot of his tie, loosening it with a sharp tug. I don't share. The intercom buzzed. Ms. Moretti? My assistant's voice crackled through. Daniel Hartwell is here. He's insistent. Xander's lips curled. Right on schedule. I smoothed my hands down the front of his shirt. Shall we? The scene in the reception area was better than I could have scripted. Daniel's normally perfect hair stood in disheveled spikes, his tie askew. Sophia hovered behind him, her designer dress wrinkled from what looked like a cross-country flight. They both froze when they saw us. Xander's arm slung possessively around my waist, my left hand conspicuously bare of rings. Daniel's voice cracked. You can't be serious. Xander didn't bother responding, simply handed him a folded newspaper. The headline blared. Hartwell Media announces leadership restructure. Daniel Hartwell removed from all executive committees. Sophia made a small wounded noise. Elena, please. I held up a hand. Save it. My heels clicked against the marble as I approached them. Daniel, your company email has been disabled. Security will escort you to collect your things. I turned to Sophia. As for you, the elevator dinged open, revealing 2 uniformed officers. My smile turned razor sharp. Right on time. Sophia paled. What is this? One officer stepped forward. Sophia Langley? You're under arrest for embezzlement. We have evidence you've been siphoning funds from the Hartwell Foundation charity account. Daniel recoiled. What? I adjusted the cuff of my blazer. Didn't you wonder how she afforded that Cartier bracelet she wore to the gala? The one she claimed was a gift from you. As the officers led a sobbing Sophia away, Daniel turned to Xander. Uncle, you can't. Xander silenced him with a look. You made your choice. Now live with it. The elevator doors closed on Daniel's shattered expression. Xander's hand found the small of my back. Still think the invitation is presumptuous? I turned in his arms, my lips brushing his in a whisper of a kiss. Let's discuss it over dinner. The morning of our wedding dawned with the kind of crystalline clarity only early June could provide. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, watching the first rays of sunlight gild the Manhattan skyline, my reflection a pale ghost in the glass. The ivory couture gown hanging behind me, a razor-sharp silhouette of French lace and silk, was worth more than Daniel's annual salary. Xander's voice cut through the silence. Having second thoughts? I didn't turn. Do I strike you as the type? His reflection appeared behind mine, his hands settling on my bare shoulders. He was already dressed in his tuxedo, the bow tie hanging loose around his neck. No. You strike me as the type who has one last chess move to make. I smiled and turned in his arms, smoothing my palms over the pristine white of his shirt front. Perceptive. His fingers traced the delicate straps of my silk robe. Let's hear it. I stepped back, reaching for the slim manila folder on the side table. Hartwell Media's IPO launches Monday. But as of this morning, I've acquired a controlling interest through a series of shell companies. I handed him the documents. 51%. Xander didn't flinch. He flipped through the pages with the same detached focus he'd give a quarterly report. You used your connections at Bauer Media to secure the funding. Among others. And if I refuse to sign the prenup? I arched a brow. Then I walk away with your company and leave you with nothing but a very expensive divorce. A slow, dangerous smile curved his lips. He tossed the folder onto the sofa and closed the distance between us in 2 strides. You magnificent bitch. The kiss was brutal, possessive, his hands fisting in my hair as he backed me against the window. I bit his lower lip hard enough to draw blood, and he growled, gripping my thigh to hike my leg around his hip. The knock at the door was impressively timid. Sir? Ma'am? The guests have arrived. Xander pulled back just enough to meet my gaze. His lips were swollen, his pupils blown. Last chance to run. I reached behind me, unhooking the wedding gown from its padded hanger. Put this on me. Then watch what happens when Daniel realizes he's about to kneel to his new CO. The ceremony was a masterclass in psychological warfare. 200 of New York's elite filled the penthouse terrace, their whispers dying the moment I appeared on my father's arm. Daniel sat in the back row, his face ashen, Sophia's empty chair beside him a glaring omission. But it was Xander's expression that nearly undid me, the raw, unguarded hunger in his eyes as I approached. The officiant cleared his throat. If anyone objects. I do. Daniel stood, his hands shaking. This is a farce. She's only doing this for revenge. A hush fell over the crowd. Xander didn't even glance at his nephew. His voice carried, cold and final. Sit down, Daniel. Or I'll have security remove you. Daniel crumpled back into his seat. I took Xander's hand, his fingers tightening around mine as the officiant began the vows. When it came time to exchange rings, I slid a platinum band onto his finger, engraved with the coordinates of La Perla. Xander's lips quirked. Then he reached into his pocket and produced a second ring. Not a wedding band. A Hartwell Media signet. The one reserved for the CEO. He slid it onto my finger beside the diamond. Checkmate, he murmured. I smiled as the crowd erupted into applause. Game over. The end.